I thought I got the wrong book.
I'm still convinced that most of the people that have made adaptations have not actually read it.
They've never read it. Yeah,
they just got like the basic premise of it.
Like they got the Cliff Notes version, if that.
It's like, wait, what's this Arctic Explorer? Is that a guy with huskies on a dog sled? And what the fuck is going on?
This podcast is not suitable for children or those who are easily disturbed. Spoiler warning for whatever is in the title of this episode.
And now for the obligatory socials. Please like, share and subscribe. Follow Daniel at DStarSick on Twitter. Follow Ryan at Darth Damio on the Bluebird app. You can find the podcast on Twitter at HorrorPod69. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Slasher and Goodreads. Become part of the Disturbed community by asking for the Facebook group and Discord links. Send dick pics to the Horror of Babylon podcast at gmail.com. Support the show at patreon.com/the Horror of Babylon. In closing, you can let your friends know that The Horror of Babylon is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible and all other major podcast apps.
Welcome to episode 52 of The Horror of Babylon, where we are discussing Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I am Ryan, and with me as always is Daniel. Say hi, Daniel.
I thought it was Frankenstein.
That's Frankenstein.
I beg your pardon?
My name. It's pronounced Frankenstein.
Frankenstein, you uncultured swine.
And Hef's here too. I still haven't thought of a good way to include you in that intro we've established.
That's okay. I kind of like him making some off scale joke, and then me having a smart aleck quip, and then you just going, okay, and Hef's here too. Right. I think that's actually pretty good.
Okay, cool. Before we shout out to our patron, who we established shall be known as Abigail the First,
Breaker of Chains, Mother of Dragons.
As our first patron, she has earned that title. It will be hers forever, even if she cancels her subscription after 1 month. Anyways, thank you very much for your support. Daniel and I are very touched, and Hef's just mostly confused.
Abigail rocks forever. Abigail. Lady Abigail. Sir Abigail, however you want to be endorsed.
All
the
right.
first.
The first.
Breaker of Chains, Mother of Dragons.
Okay, that's
How hard is that?
I don't know. I'm old.
All right.
Freer of slaves.
Freer of slaves.
All right, old man. Abigail the Great Emancipator. Abigail the Rail Splitter. Honest Abigail. Old Father Abigail.
Send us penny slots. We will scroll.
I like penny slots. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, old man. So you've started a new Let's Play. Why don't you tell the people about it?
Well, me and my olden ways have figured out how to get a GameCube to run on a PC so that I can record it. Thought it would be a good opportunity to play a lot of the console stuff that I have way too many of. Or since I've been doing the Let's Plays, obviously horror games are the primary here because we're a horror podcast. My newest project, Luigi's Mansion, would actually be more cheeky, something more fun, I think, for the people to get into. I've also been experimenting with video editing on this one specifically, and I thought that one would be a pretty good one because there's going to be parts where you don't necessarily need as much content and things like that. You can cut out the slow points.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take away from a story because it's Luigi's Mansion. It's been fun, and I've never played it before, so if y'all are watching the vids on it, I mean, that's the first time I've played the game. It's probably very obvious I'm not good at it in a lot of points.
Does Chris Pratt play Luigi in this one?
God, you just hurt my head so bad.
No, he does not. It shocks me that you've never played that game before. Okay, maybe this is just me, but I had got a GameCube on release day with that game and had beat that game within a week later because I just did nothing but play it.
Honestly, we were primarily a PlayStation household for a long time. And I don't think I owned a GameCube until 15, 16, something like that.
We were PlayStation Nintendo household. We dual wielded the Ahsoka Tano.
Well, I basically just
Star Killer.
I fixed my GameCube. I had a GameCube, and then I was able to actually get it fixed. So that actually came to be really just out of basically just I got it working, and I was just like, hey, I have this Luigi's Mansion game for no reason. Let's test it. And like that was kind of the perfect little thing to start with. Editing, console recording, and it's been a new experience for me on really a lot of ends. But I think it's going to be good. I think I'm going to be able to improve a lot of the video content I've had before.
I've enjoyed what I've seen of it so far, and when this episode drops, the first 2 episodes of Luigi's Mansion should be out, and they'll be. The first one was a little late, and I apologize, but there will be new episodes every Wednesday moving forward.
But I hope you all enjoy it. Those of you who are listening, I'll be checking the videos like on YouTube and stuff like that. Please leave comments. Leave some kind of indication of... I like to play generally anything, but I'd love some guidance. I would love to see somebody actually be like, hey, please play this. This is really cool. I'd like to have some recommendations because...
I'm just going to recommend you super fucked up shit.
Well, I've got a PlayStation 2 kind of figured out. So I've got some games I want to play that are really... Like, I have plans for Hunting Ground and,
so good.
And Rule of Rose, of which I guess because there's...
That game is bad, but it's fucked up.
Well, there aren't many...
Like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet.
Yeah.
There aren't many, like even on YouTube, there aren't a whole lot of Let's Plays on them.
Because the game's so fucking hard to find.
Yeah, well, I guess even Rule of Rose doesn't have a ROM file on a lot of sites because it's so hard to find.
And when I said the game is bad, I mean like the gameplay, it's kind of clunky. Mm-hmm. But like the story is really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I'm super excited. I'm super excited for that to be kind of one of our niche things that I think only we have.
Yeah,
very few other people have that, so I think that's going to be really cool for everyone.
And if you need more, I'll lend you what's left of my horror collection.
Okay, so jumping into our history with Frankenstein. Well, first, I don't want to say the franchise, but the story itself, and then with the book specifically. And I'm going to kick this off so I can kind of give you guys an example of what I want to hear from you. So, I had never read this book till last year, and surprisingly, I've never seen the 1931 Universal Boris Karloff film. So the majority of my life, my notion of quote-unquote Frankenstein was the popular notion based on not the original movie, the 1931 film. The adaptation of Frankenstein that I am most familiar with is actually Young Frankenstein. I watched that movie on repeat as a child. I even specifically remember bringing the VHS to my 3rd grade teacher and asking her if we could watch it in class. She, of course, said no. No, we will not be watching that in class.
That's pretty funny.
It's pretty funny. Have a roll in the hay.
I remember who our 3rd grade teacher was. That was a bold move of you.
It was a bold move of me, but I had no idea. But yeah, so aside from that, really all my knowledge of Frankenstein came from Scooby-Doo and the Ghoul School and
pop culture around it.
Yeah, Reluctant Werewolf and stuff like that.
I love the Reluctant Werewolf.
Yeah, that's
it's the werewolf wagon.
Oh, what's the one?
The Boo Brothers.
What's the one where Scooby-Doo and them like teach monster girls at a school? Ghoul School. Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah,
actually, all 3 of those are actually pretty decent.
Yeah. Those are my favorites. It's like those and Zombie Island and a couple others.
Zombie Island's really good.
And then the book itself, I read last year after reading Dracula. I was like, oh, I did Dracula. Now I'm going to do Frankenstein. And I really, really liked it. I kind of had a level 1 reading of it last time. So the first time I read it, I wasn't really thinking about like meanings and interpretations. I was basically just like, oh my god, this is so different than what the popular understanding of Frankenstein is. And then when I reread it for this podcast, I was able to get a little deeper into it and think a little bit more about the book itself instead of comparing it to what, exists in movies and such. Daniel, how about you?
I was a really, really big fan of the Universal monsters, partially because when I was a kid, and it was either Burger King or McDonald's did toys of them, and I collected all those toys. I still have all those toys. They started playing them on TV. I have a story more specific for Dracula when we finally get to that, but I watched all of those movies. I watched Frankenstein a few times, grew up with them around pop culture, and then it was like right before we started this podcast is when I first read the book. It's weird. I always had trouble reading classic literature There's something about the language that confuses me most of the time. But for some reason, this one clicked with it. It's actually made me appreciate classic language, and it's also made it easier for me to read it. So ever since then, I've been able to go back and read things that I used to have trouble reading, really enjoying like that Victorian romantic language.
If this was one of the first literature novels that I had read, I would have struggled a lot. But I read a lot in college, like Lord of the Rings multiple times, Silmarillion multiple times. I've kind of gotten used to it.
Like the closest thing to this that I had was Dracula.
Yeah.
And then I benefited from Dracula from it just being in a diary format.
Dracula is also, in terms of the language, Dracula is more straightforward
Than Frankenstein is.
Yeah, this is a little more flowery.
It's very metaphor.
In terms of like literature romanticism, this is a go-to example.
Yeah.
It's like reading, my mom's favorite book, Jane Eyre. Have you guys read Jane Eyre?
Nope.
It's basically Frankenstein. It's written exactly the same.
Hef.
I mean, my history with it's not too dissimilar from Ryan's. Cartoon interpretations, as I've said multiple times being here, horror is not the biggest genre that I was really ever interested in. Always kind of passed me by as far as things. Never really found anything that I got into. I find this interesting because, like, everybody knows what Frankenstein's monster is, even if they call it Frankenstein or Frankenstein's monster, which is also a popular culture error, I guess, if you want to look at it that way.
Common misconception?
Sure, that sounds right.
The wretch, the devil.
The creature.
And I read the book, actually, it's probably been just a little over a month ago now, so I'm still pretty fresh off of it. But I'm like you guys in the sense that it's so dissimilar from anything that it has basically inspired. It is so different. For a little bit when I was listening to it, like, I thought I got the wrong book.
I'm still convinced that most of the people that have made like adaptations have not actually read it.
They've never read it. Yeah.
They just got like the basic premise of it.
Like they got the Cliff Notes version, if that.
It's like, wait, what's this Arctic Explorer? Is that a guy with huskies on a dog sled? And what the fuck is going on?
Yeah. Well, and even that took me a while to figure out this was a build-up.
It's a frame narrative.
Yeah, I was just like, because I didn't know who Frankenstein himself was probably until, that's probably like 40, 50 pages into the book. Like, it's a while until you're like sure of who this is. I'm like, oh, shit. So, I mean, but the book itself is just so immensely different from anything. The
vampire's a pure myth, superstition. I may be able to bring you proof that the superstition of yesterday can become the scientific reality of today.
Go ahead and jump into a little bit of background on Mary Shelley.
Oh boy.
The book itself. So Mary Shelley was born in London in 1797. Her maiden name was Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin. Her father was a political philosopher, an anarchist, and a poet, and her mother was a feminist and a political rights activist. Now, just to kind of illustrate the kind of household she grew up with, she was born at the end of the 18th century, lived in the early 19th century, and she had both her father's and her mother's last name, which was that's even weird. Like, no, I don't want to say weird. That's uncommon these days. You
still get looks, whenever you see someone with a hyphenated name.
Yeah.
Like, that still draws an eye even today.
Yeah, and it's more common for women to marry and keep their maiden names, but it's still not like a completely accepted practice.
Yeah.
There are still people who like roll their eyes like, oh, she's such a feminist, she couldn't even take her husband's name. But yeah, so that...
my wife just didn't want to pay $50.
No, I mean, that's fair. I completely understand it. Like, if Becca and I ever get married, she's not taking my name. She's like, I don't want to spell that any more than I have to.
My ex-wife was more upset when she had to change it back, so...
Yeah.
And gotta wait on that Social Security card, too.
Unfortunately, we live in a society where half of all marriages ended in divorce, so why change something you might have to change back? So, some of her other works include the apocalyptic novel, The Last Man, and really good short story, The Mortal Immortal, which I have read and do recommend. And she has a lot of other stuff that we're not going to get into. What I primarily want to talk about is the origin of this story and how it became a novel, in the year 1816, a volcano erupted, sending immense amounts of ash into the Earth's atmosphere, which actually affected the seasons and caused the winter that year to go longer than normal. And people had to find more ways to keep themselves entertained inside than they normally would have. And Mary, at the time, Wollstonecraft Godwin, and her gang, what they decided to do was to have these parties inside where they would light a fire and they would try to come up with these spooky stories to tell each other. Now, there were some pretty famous people in these groups. Her eventual husband, Percy Shelley, John William Polidori, who would write The Vampire and publish it in 1819, which is a vampire novella, which, along with Carmilla, would be one of the primary influences on Bram Stoker when he was writing Dracula. I have read The Vampire. It's really good.
I still need to read it.
We should. Don't read it. We'll do it on the podcast. We should have done it before Dracula. Another was Lord Byron, famous English poet, who wrote The End of My Journey, which is actually a vampire story as well. And
a lot of vampire stories.
Yeah. We have little 18-year-old Mary, who is hanging out with all these educated big boys, and she decides to come up with this story about a mad scientist who tries to reanimate dead flesh into a living thing. And over the period of 2 years, she takes that story, turns it into the novel Frankenstein, which would be released in London in 1818. From this eruption, we get Frankenstein, we get The Vampire, which would lead to inspiring Bram Stoker and eventually Dracula. So, like, the two iconic Gothic horror novels both may not have happened if this volcano wouldn't have erupted.
Volcano COVID saves the day.
Volcano COVID saves the day.
I love more than anything that she was 18 years old when she did this. There's like a lot of feminist icons out there that people prop up. I don't see Mary Shelley propped up nearly enough.
She doesn't get nearly enough credit for not just this book, but she has a whole library. I've only read The Mortal Immortal, but it's really good. It really makes me want to read more of her stuff, which really should do.
I think the themes of the book are also like something very impressive for a woman of her time, because there's a lot of points in the book where you kind of have like the way I like kind of read it as far as that, like there is very much a folly of man aspect to the book, and being written by a woman at the time, I can imagine she would have caught a lot of flack for writing something like that, which to me makes it more impressive that it was ever even got to publishing.
I completely agree. Her dad was an anarchist and a political philosopher. Her mother actually died
during childbirth.
Yeah, within 2 weeks after childbirth due to complications. But you know, she was a feminist, and she obviously had influence on her husband and how he would raise Mary. We're going to get more to that when we get to themes. So just a little bit more. As I said, the first edition was published in London. Second edition was published in Paris in French in 1821. It's generally considered to be the first science fiction novel, but is also commonly considered to be one of the best examples of a Gothic and a romance novel. Gothic meaning not our modern understanding of the word, but
not Hot Topic.
Not Hot Topic, but it's referring to an aesthetic.
Yeah.
Fear, haunting, negative emotions, loathing. Dracula's another huge Gothic novel.
Same thing with romantic. It's not referring to
a love story.
It's referring to a writing style of the time and a philosophy about like the beauty in nature.
And without getting too specific into it, you know, at the time there were the classics, the Greek philosophers, Shakespeare, and what would have been modern at that time were romantic writers who were thinking more about the common person and the common person's struggle, and then, you know, idealizing nature, like Daniel said. So it's a good example of a romantic.
Romantic literature does lead to this one. I don't know where it was going to fit in here. I think this is the best part to put it. There's a certain amount of melodrama that comes with romantic writing.
Yeah.
And if that turns you off, Frankenstein might turn you off because there is a certain level of melodrama. I love it. I get a kick out of it. So,
but I'm also a Jane Austen fan.
Yeah. So, but it's in there, so I wanted to bring it up at some point, and it seems like that's where it fits.
I also just wanted to point out there that this book is sometimes known as the modern Prometheus, which is we're going to discuss in structure and themes. By the way, let's jump to structure and themes.
Oh my god.
What a segue.
Oh, and
we cannot possibly cover everything that has ever been written about this book.
No. We're going to kind of do a high level. We might get specific on a few topics, but this is a very deep, very complicated book. You cannot be comprehensive with a book like this.
Yeah.
All right, so let's start with genre. It's known as a horror novel to the common person. In literature circles, it's often heralded as the first science fiction novel. Daniel, would you say that this book is sci-fi, horror, or both? Or none, or neither?
If you were asking me as like a literature person how I would describe it, I'd call it a romantic novel. If you're asking me as like, if I'm trying to sell it to somebody to read, I would call it a horror novel. Mostly just because the sci-fi in this, because when people think of sci-fi these days, they think of like spaceships. To them, the science fiction in this is just old horror tropes. So it's hard to sell it to them as the first science fiction novel without sitting there and explaining to them the whole history of how we got to the spaceships.
I think like the first, like after the frame narrative, the whole like first third, like part one of the novel is very strong science fiction. Because it's very much about Victor and his discovery of natural philosophy and how he's gone between like different studies and trying to settle
versus his old alchemic practices.
Yeah,
which for some reason influenced how he, even though he says he abandons them, he attributes the creation of the monster to his old alchemic beliefs.
Yes.
Side tangent, real quick. When I was reading this, there were a lot of references to, and I'm not real worldly with stuff like this, but I found so many references to things that I played in Amnesia.
Yeah.
Like, because like they talk about like all the different like pseudoscientists of their age. I was ignorant. I'm just like, oh, cool. These are like characters in the story, right?
No,
no, these are like actual figures that would. And like Amnesia plays a lot off of that. Like this time specifically around the Frankenstein era, and it was cool to kind of like listen to the Amnesia rantings, if you will.
I'm going to butcher all the pronunciations of all these characters' names.
Well, but it was cool that like I discovered that there was actually a deeper meaning. There was deeper stuff going on in that game as well. Like it was kind of cool to read the book and be like, holy shit, there's actually way deeper stuff than I even thought.
Yeah.
So that game.
Is sci-fi horror? I say it's both.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely both, but if I was trying to sell it to somebody these days, I would sell it as like an early horror novel.
Yeah, it's like a gothic horror. It's
because people who are into sci-fi these days,
it's not aliens and spaceships.
Yeah, like if you're asking me what it leans closer to in a modern context, I think it leans closer towards modern horror than it does modern sci-fi.
Yeah, can't argue with that.
This is probably kind of offensive, but I would tell somebody it's basically a classic soap opera.
Yeah, it's very melodramatic.
It is.
Yeah, I don't find that offensive.
Yeah, because I mean, there's a lot of
that's romantic literature.
I mean, to me, like everybody's like watched some episode of some sort of soap opera because daytime TV existed and we were pretending to be sick.
Yeah, my mom watched
I like
Young and the Restless every day.
But like, there would always be like that one goofy episode you'd watch where like something absolutely absurd would happen.
Yeah.
And like Frankenstein is kind of like that. Like it's just like, here's all this melodrama. Oh, by the way, there's also this absurd thing that's happening. And you're just kind of like unfolding the drama along with like the actual event that's happening. So like
it's like if there was a Jane Austen novel and the main character was a mad scientist, that's Frankenstein.
Yeah, basically.
Okay. So let's get into structure, and let's kick it off with a discussion of the frame narrative. And I want to do like a real brief, high-level summary of the book right now.
And you brought us?
No,
you want a brief, high-level summary?
No, I'm going to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, he's going to do the brief.
So, because I the idea of this podcast is that the listeners will read the book and then listen to the podcast. With this book, I feel like there's going to be some number of listeners who have not read the book, which is going to make the discussion of this very difficult.
Yeah.
So, high level, we start off with Captain Robert Walton, who is an Arctic explorer and is on a boat sailing to the North Pole. And he's sailing by some ice flats, and he sees a very tall, humanoid-looking person on a dog sled with some huskies. He's like, huh, that's fucking weird. And then...
How peculiar that.
Straight out of the book.
No, wait, no, let me use
weird.
the language of the time. How queer.
How queer. And then he finds a man whose dogs have died, and he's freezing to death. Takes him on board. Turns out it's Victor Frankenstein. And he nurses him back to health, and then Victor tells him his story. And that's the frame narrative. Now we go to Victor's story. Without getting into all the specifics, Victor had a very happy childhood in Switzerland. Then he went to college, and it ruined his fucking life. So he went to college.
Not wrong.
He went to college, became obsessed with chemistry and natural philosophy, determined that he would be able to reanimate a dead body, dug up some graves, got some dead body parts, reanimated a dead body. As soon as the creature awoken, Victor's like, holy fuck, what the hell did I do? And ran away. And then the creature runs away, and then Victor conveniently gets this brain fever that he has for months, and his friend has to nurse him back to life. The creature goes off, lives in the wild, comes upon these people, spies on them for months at a time, learns to read and write and talk and blah, 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 and then goes off in search of Victor, ends up murdering his brother. All of these things happen. Victor's fiance/cousin dies, his dad dies, his best friend dies. Basically what ends up happening is all the people that Victor cares about die, and he and the creature just become locked in this conflict where they're trying to kill each other, and they chase each other up to the North Pole, which is where Captain Robert Walton finds Victor, and then we're back to it's come full circle to the frame narrative, and Victor dies. And then the creature shows up on the ship and is like, now I won't get my revenge because you're dead. And then he leaves the ship and goes off into the frozen waste to presumably die as well. And that's one of the greatest novels of all time.
Quotations, high level. And in addition, it's like I'm rereading the book all over again.
I mean... If I tried to
you're 100% right in every single part of that.
So, let's talk about the frame narrative. Daniel, what were your thoughts the first time you read the book on the frame narrative? And now that you've read it twice and had some time to digest it, what do you think of it now?
You sort of skimmed over one thing that I thought you would bring up, and that's we start with the captain of the ship, who is then talking to Frankenstein and then telling Frankenstein's story, and then Frankenstein starts telling the story that the monster told him. So at one point we get like 3 stories in.
Which Stephen King would later steal for a little novel called It.
Yeah. So we have what's the ship captain's name again?
Robert Walton.
It's so
Captain of the Archangel.
It's such a fancy name. I love all these characters' names. But you have Walton here telling Frankenstein's story, who then starts telling the monster's story. Yeah. And when I first read the novel, I was sitting there going, is somebody in the monster story going to start telling me a story?
So the actual structure of the book is that as Victor is recuperating and then dying, he tells his story to Robert Walton. Robert Walton records Victor's story in his journal
in great detail
from a first-person point of view as Victor, and then the middle portion of it is the creature's story that the creature told to Victor, and Robert Walton writes it as a first-person perspective from the creature.
Yes. And I love every second of it.
It is a very unique structure for a novel. I love every bit of it. And like we said in our It episodes, I really like when somebody is ballsy with the structure of their book. Sorry, Mary Shelley, who is ambitious with the structure of their book, and it pays off.
It just now clicked that what you said. God damn it, I'm so slow. Continue, I'm sorry.
Do you need a coffee beer?
Yeah, you want to try it?
It's been a long goddamn day.
Here, let me get you a coffee beer.
No, don't do this to me. Like, I'll drive. Like, I'll be in my car looking at the windshield, being like, "Why is there 3 windshields?"
Oh yes, I am a fan of the frame narrative. Mostly because it starts off as letters, so I get like my journal entries that I love, and then it goes into a first person perspective, so you get a little bit of like a little mix in there. So if you don't like journal entries, it's not there for the whole time. Then you get something that's a little bit more straightforward. You get your first person narrative, which is still technically a recording.
Yes.
So
I think it's written very, like, it is an elegant writing, but it is also written, I think, also pretty simplistically. Because, and what I mean by that is, you have each character, you really only have about, really 3 characters that you are paying attention to. You have the captain, you have Frankenstein, and then you have the creature.
yeah,
They are the only ones that are technically telling the story throughout this whole novel. And what's nice about it as well is the book actually tells you when they're going to switch.
yeah.
Like, they do it obviously via dialogue, but like I know at each point where they were jumping from one to the other, they were telling you, "Let me tell you my story.
Yeah.
Let me go into," like, it's very obvious when which I think is, for something like this where it does jump to big perspective jumps like that, it needs to happen, and I think it does it very well.
I still almost wish we would have gotten a 4th story deep, like someone told Frankenstein the creature a story.
It's literally just it's the little.
We did.
We did?
The story of the family.
Oh yeah,
His protectors.
Yeah, his protectors, my benefactors.
Yeah, the people from Paris.
Be my good friends.
So we did.
We did get 4 stories deep. It's Inception officially.
Yeah. Okay. So let's jump over to themes, and I've got like the ones that jumped out at me written down. Obviously there are more, and you guys can add as we go, but let's just kind of take these one at a time. The first big one that I wrote down was birth. Birth is a huge theme in this, and some of the reviews that I listened to and read described this novel as just about a terrible birth, a birth that goes wrong. And when learning about Mary Shelley's background, you can see where she may have had some complex feelings about birth. Her mother died of a complication of her birth. Mary Shelley also lost children due to complications at birth. And of course, that was very common during that time period to lose kids. Not like it is today.
Hey, modern medicine, thanks for being better than 18th century medicine.
Yeah, for sure. We really appreciate that. So do my two children.
Oh, we're jumping in.
None of my children know I'm the dad, so...
Yeah, that's fine.
Are we commenting on the miracle of modern medicine, or like the actual like birth process?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for penicillin.
Yeah.
Even though I'm allergic.
Thank you, Balto, for making sure the village got the penicillin on time.
So still, you're disposable. That's my favorite line.
That was a reference. You unlocked so many hidden memories.
Nice. As far as like just themes that I noticed, as far as this, or just this particular one.
If you have any thoughts on birth, cool. If not, we can move on to another one. Or
I have like an adjacent theme.
Okay.
Which is like the responsibility that comes with birth, or creating a life,
or the abandonment of said.
And that ties into what I wrote down as our second theme, as playing God.
Yeah.
Which, of course, I touched a little bit on with when I was talking about Tolkien earlier. But there's 2 facets of it. It's like, can man create like God can create, or that famous Ian Malcolm line, you were so concerned over could you forgot to think about should you.
And I don't think we actually get a good answer to that in this book, mostly because Victor Frankenstein doesn't try to be responsible.
No. He takes one look at what he's created and he's like, ah, get away from me! Brain fever! I'm not responsible for this!
He saw it and he's like,
for this.
oh no, I created Megan, I must leave.
Gross.
I find that the book gives him 2 opportunities to rectify it too, and he blows them both.
Yeah.
Like, the first one is like genuine shock, and then the second one is actually the creature sitting down and saying, this is what I've experienced, this is how I feel, what is your response? And he is literally just like, you're a fucking monster.
Well, you killed my little brother and told me you framed a woman for it, so I guess I'll make you a woman.
So, I mean, I liked how they did it, though. It made it hard to forgive, but at the same time, it also is just like, but there's nothing really to forgive because you kind of did this already. It's a tough setup.
They're both incredibly complicated characters, both who are not, I would say, not inherently bad, but do bad things and for complicated reasons.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's no correct answer,
yeah,
and that's what makes it, I think, so poignant.
I don't know where to fit this in, so I guess I'll try to shoehorn it into themes. In our Discord, Ryan linked a couple videos, and I had already watched a few videos and read a lot of articles for this.
Oh, I forgot to read that article you sent me.
Oh, we'll get to that. But this is a book that has so much going on in it that no matter how you try to like summarize the book on your YouTube channel, there's going to be a comment underneath going, actually, let me explain to you why you're wrong.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously, a lot of this stuff, it's interpretations. We do not know what Mary Shelley was thinking when she wrote this book. We don't know anything other than what is on the page, but because it's such a deep book, it's fun to talk about this stuff.
If you had to ask me my opinion, I'd say she was intentionally vague because it makes for better storytelling.
She was 18.
Yeah.
What did you do when you were 18?
Overdose.
Dude.
My abuser tried to reconnect. That was kind of sad.
Try to remember what my virginity was lost to. Walmsley saw you.
Walmsley?
But there is a... In terms of when you're writing something, you can either be super specific or you can be a little vague to let people's imaginations fill things in. And I think, for all intents and purposes, she erred on the side of caution and went, well, I don't quite understand how this science is going to work in a few years, so I'm going to make it vague in this story so it can always work.
Yeah.
Now, maybe that's just me giving her way too much credit, but I want to give her credit because I love this book so much.
I didn't see it anywhere in the outline. You said something there that kind of triggered something else here.
I am used to triggering you.
That's true. I've got a sticker that proves it. One thing I found particularly interesting is because everybody, again, the modern interpretations of Frankenstein are just so unlike what this is. One thing I found really interesting is when he talks about the actual spark of life. What it is that brings the creature to life and how intentionally they don't tell you what it is. And I thought that was nothing less than fascinating. Specifically because they don't describe it. So all of these movies that have, in all these different subcultures that have interpretations of Frankenstein, literally the only thing they have to go off of is what's called a spark of life, which is what I assumed was where the lightning came from.
What I like about that is you would think that if you're writing a quote-unquote science fiction novel about reanimating flesh, and you would come up with some reason for why that works. But she doesn't have to, because the logic of the book says that Victor doesn't want to share that information so that other people won't try to replicate it.
It was
so smart.
It was very forward-thinking.
The article I sent Ryan, it had 2 basic premises. One of them was what kind of scientist was Victor trying to be? And the second one was, what's the monster actually made out of? And the...
lips and assholes.
Well, the article argues, and it uses a fairly convincing evidence, and he's like, I'm only going to use stuff that's from the book, not stuff that Mary Shelley said later, not stuff that people have interpreted later, just what's in the actual narrative. And they came to the conclusion that he was trying to be a chemist, So it was a chemical reaction. And the second one was that he didn't use as much dead flesh as people thought, because there's a line in the book where he says, I discovered that you can't reanimate the dead. So he alchemically creates flesh himself.
I will link that article and a couple of the videos that have fueled some of this discussion in the show notes.
Yeah.
So that everybody can check these out.
Now, I don't know how much I actually agree with it, but I thought that was an interesting interpretation.
As we're wrapping up this discussion of playing God and science as a theme,
that beer is gross.
It is so gross. I want to say that the frame narrative itself is actually a metaphor for the story. So, kind of a real basic spin on the story is Victor figured out how to reanimate the dead. He didn't think about if he should or not. He didn't think about the consequences. He did do it, and it went badly. Captain Robert Walton, the Arctic explorer who's the captain of the Archangel, is risking his life and the life of his crew by trying to go north and find the North Pole. And he's not thinking about if he should put the lives of his men and himself at risk to do this. He's just thinking about that he thinks he can do it and that he wants to do it. So, in a way, the frame narrative itself is a metaphor for what is maybe the biggest theme of the book.
The monster doesn't think about should he accost a blind man while his family is away. That was a stretch, but I thought it was funny.
But the monster is actually like, what if we bring another one like me here? Will she suffer the same as I do? Like, he doesn't think about that. So that's kind of, I guess you could argue that's
another one.
I think
each one of them have their own personal, I don't want to say struggle against godly nature.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they all three experience it in some way, shape, or form.
I do think it's really funny when Frankenstein's building, I'm going to call her the bride for just simplicity's sake. He's building the bride and he's like, what if she rejects him? Which is like the monster didn't even consider that as a possibility, which I thought is kind of funny. But then Victor's sitting there going, oh, wait a minute. What if they have kids too?
Yeah.
And he just starts thinking of all these hypotheticals. I love that.
Maybe this isn't a good idea.
Just spirals.
But I do think that's kind of a interesting concept, because literally the monster was rejected by literally everyone else. And he's just like, I need you to make a woman ugly enough for me.
Little did he know Marty Feldman would exist in about 100 years.
What if she prefers the good-looking Victor over the monster?
Okay, so continuing with themes, we mentioned briefly that it's sort of a quote-unquote modern interpretation of the story of Prometheus. I think for time's sake, we're going to just mention that. If you want to know more about it, look up the story of Prometheus from Greek mythology. You'll see a lot of the parallels there.
I could sum it up in a few sentences. He created life from literally clay, gave it knowledge, and then he was punished for it.
So, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. It's literally just the same story.
Another theme I want to talk about is, Daniel said earlier that Mary Shelley doesn't get enough credit as being a feminist icon. And maybe if you read this book and didn't know a lot about her life, you go, well, there aren't really any strong female characters in this book. Elizabeth is not what we would call in modern terms a strong female character. She is strong in that she goes through all this suffering and kind of holds the family together despite all the fuck-uppery of Victor. But there's not a female character that takes a leading role in this story, and it's kind of strange when you think about that a woman wrote this and she was the daughter of a prominent political activist and feminist. So, but there is a feminist reading to this book, and it's that men who have narrow-minded goals ruin the lives of women and other people.
I feel attacked.
But you think about it, Victor has one thing in his head, and he can't shake that, and it just proceeds to fuck up Elizabeth's life to the point where she's murdered by a reanimated corpse.
There's a simple, like, I kind of read it as a simpler thing, but it may be because I'm a man. But the way I saw it was just like, if she was thinking of her, it would be if she was wanting to write the story to be successful and impressionable, or if she was really writing it just for her own, I guess, her own, prevalent thoughts and foremost things.
For her enjoyment,
basically.
versus it being a commercial success.
Now, to me, like, if you look at it, like, if she was trying to write it for it to basically just beat the snot out of any other book a man wrote, I imagine around that time, and again, this is me speaking as a man who does very little research, you want to have men as the focal characters for it to be taken seriously, for that age. So, like, if you expose it too much to what the punishments, I guess, of the women would have been at that time for being with these men, it's not taken as seriously. So then we go with the other alternative, which is I wrote this for my own enjoyment. In which case, I think the language that she writes in itself and really kind of emphasizes the overall beauty and overarching nature that it's trying to represent. It's a dismal story. It's a terrifying, ugly tale.
Yes.
But it is specifically written in a very delicate language. I think that it's supposed to kind of give you a sense of, like, there's beauty even in terror.
And throughout it, and this really attributes to the capital R romantic aspect of it, with all these terrible things happening, there are so many moments where the characters take a break to talk about, oh, the birds are singing and it's so beautiful. Victor, I love the Rhine River. I've lived in the Alps my soul belongs here in the river of the Rhine, and it's so beautiful. And just taking moments to appreciate the beauty of nature in this terrible, horrible, ugly story.
I agree. As far as your men ruining lives of women thing, I mean, it's like you said. I mean, we're never really going to know, I don't think.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's the beauty of the book, too, is the book itself it transcends so many more than just the actual story itself, that I really think it's almost a book of poetry. You read it, and you kind of take your own interpretations with it as you go, which I think is what really makes it real timeless.
I agree.
I concur.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Let's jump into characters. I only really wrote down 2, and yes, Captain Robert Walton is kind of a third character in that he's a storyteller.
And his sister.
Yeah, but in terms of the actual meat of the story, there's really only 2
that matter.
Yeah, there's the story of Victor and the story of the creature.
Yeah, and like there's a lot of sub characters that you could get into.
Lots of them.
But if you're really getting into like what the story's about, it's about these 2.
Yeah, and I don't want this episode to be 4 hours long, so we're not going to talk about every single character. But obviously, we'll talk about other characters as we'll talk about Elizabeth and how she relates to Victor. But let's kick it off, of course, with the titular character, Victor Frankenstein. General thoughts. Hef, I'm going to go to you first. Reading this for the first time, knowing, having young Frankenstein in your head, knowing what you know of Victor Frankenstein, what did you make of this character?
Absolutely, like, spectacularly opposite of what I expected he would be. I found him to be a much more endearing character at first, because obviously, like, he's just a young boy with interest in some of the occult and things like that. He just really wants to broaden his horizons.
He wants to learn.
He wants to learn. Yeah,
he's Edward Elric. He's just doing stuff.
He just wants to, do his stuff and like not do the college classes that he finds absolutely just boring. And his character is very. His character is very fleshed out in the sense that, like, we spend so much time with him in his head that we really kind of do see. It's one of those things, like, this is one of the few books I think I've read where you can just feel the character's desperation. Like, Victor's desperation, I think, is really what hits home for me in this book, because, like, the entire step of the way where you're seeing and experiencing him go through his desolation after he creates the creature, it's described in such a depth that you really are able to kind of encapsulate what he's telling you. Even if you don't necessarily agree with it, you completely almost understand the perspective under which he's describing it. So I find him, like I said, to be a very tortured character who really just... He was a kid that just wanted to try something that had never been done before, and he got punished for it. And in a weird, twisted way, at the end of the book, he comes to his own conclusion of what he has to do. It's not necessarily the best conclusion, but because of the way that the character is formed throughout the story, it's what he comes to, and really there was no other conclusion I feel like he would have come to. And I think that marks a good character for me.
My first reading, I found this character extremely endearing. And as I was reading this book, my first read through, I very much put myself in his place and just kind of experienced it all with him. And as I found him endearing, on my first read, was not sympathetic with the creature really at all the first time I read it. And then my second read, it was kind of the opposite, where I was much more, not completely, but much more sympathetic to the creature and more critical of Victor. But regardless of how I find the character morally, I definitely think he's one of the best written and most fleshed out literary characters, like, ever. Daniel.
Same. I'm probably a lot more pro on the sympathetic towards Victor side, especially when it comes to modern readings. A lot of modern readings, and you see it all the time, especially there was a Facebook meme that used to go around a lot where people are like, yeah, that's literally the point of the book, that Victor's literally the bad guy. And I'm like, kind of, sort of, but that's also sort of kind of based on its own.
I think that Victor and the creature share blame.
It's a yin and yang of blame.
Yeah, they're both, neither is truly good and neither is truly bad.
I disagree, but I'll get to that.
Okay.
There comes a certain point where I lose sympathy for people. And I'll get to that when we get to the creature. Same thing with Victor. There's a certain point when I lose sympathy for him, and that's when he goes, I know for a fact this woman is innocent. But I'm not going to try until after she's condemned.
That's on my second read through. That's the point where I started to get more critical. Like, you know, she's innocent. Obviously, you can't just go to the judge and be like, yo, I created this monster.
I made an 8-foot-tall monster.
But you need to try something.
Yeah, he needed to try something more than literally nothing.
Break her out and give her some money and let her get away. Bribe the guard.
The most he tried was letting Elizabeth get on stage and going, oh yeah, we would have given her anything if she wanted it. Yeah. And it just made the jury hate her more.
Yeah.
The last part of the book is definitely, like, Victor's kind of just a whipped ass, like, throughout the book. Because most of it is just him waiting for his punishment.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't do anything to alter it. And that was a portion of the character, while I appreciated it because, again, you know, I like the lead character, but at the same time, that's where I could definitely see the flaw of the character, in the sense that he's just kind of like, I made this bed, I'm going to lie in it, but you're also not going to try to alter anything or make it better from what you've done.
I think the one time I was super sympathetic to him, and I already brought this up, is when he's building the bride, and he literally just starts going, wait a minute, there's like 10 different things that could go wrong with this.
Yeah.
And the first responsible thing he does is not do it again. The only problem is he doesn't have a backup plan.
The best modern comparison that I can think of for Victor Frankenstein, and this might sound a little strange at first, is Jack Torrance from The Shining. If you've read the Shining novel, not the movie, almost the entire book is in Jack Torrance's head. And it's one of the best books I've ever read, where you just spend the entire book in one character's head, and the character is just so fleshed out. And like Victor, Jack Torrance is not an inherently good person. He's not a completely bad person either. He's a real human being who makes some bad decisions and does some bad things. And because you spend so much time in his head, you understand everything he does and why he does it, but it's still not okay. Not okay. And, you know, as I was reading this, I just kept taking me back to The Shining, and I was just like, wow, these are like two characters. Yes, one from a book that was written 200 years ago, and one from a book that was written like 30, 40 years ago, but I just understand both of them so well because you spend so much time in both of these people's heads, and I get the same gray impression from both. Stephen King nerd.
I'm getting there. You gotta give me time.
Soon.
Yeah. I think the only thing that was really, to me, just, I don't even want to say unforgivable, because like I don't feel like any of these characters are meant to be like forgiven for anything. But I feel like the one real big thing that really kind of irked me was when he married Elizabeth anyway. Despite the fact that the preacher basically promises she's going to die once you have created this last bit of happiness for yourself.
The biggest condemnation that I found for Victor Frankenstein came from a YouTube comment from one of the videos Ryan sent us, where somebody went, the biggest problem with Victor is when the monster threatens him on his wedding night, he automatically assumes that the monster's going to go after him and doesn't think he's going to go after someone else.
The monster says, I will see you on your wedding night. And then he leaves her alone on the wedding night, and she gets murdered
because he thinks that the monster's going to go after him, and it's a form of egocentrism.
For such a smart guy.
Or, I'm just going to say this, we're not going to talk about it because we're going to come back to it, and kiss me, fat boy. Or Victor actually hates women, and he never wanted to marry her, and he wanted her to die, so subconsciously he left her alone knowing the monster would kill her.
I do not want to be a kissing cousin. Even though we're not really cousins.
All right. I'll let that simmer in your guys' head. We'll get to that. Kiss me, fat boy. Okay, the second thing I had down is Victor a good person? We basically just discussed that. So let's talk about the creature. General thoughts. Daniel, have kicked off Victor, so you kick off the creature.
It is the creature is literature's first incel, and how people do not come to this conclusion is so far beyond me that it baffles me every time it comes up. The monster literally comes up to his creator and goes, yeah, I murdered your little brother, and I framed an innocent woman for it, and if you don't build me a girlfriend so I can have sex, I'm gonna keep doing it. The government literally needs to give me a girlfriend. Fuck you, Victor. That's the creature's whole ass attitude. It is literally every black-pilled women are the devil person I've ever met on the internet. But he can speak well, so people sympathize with him. That's my opinion of the monster. Yeah, he reads Paradise Lost, so now he's deep.
I mean, he is deep.
He is as deep as the Joker from the Joker film to me. He's just another literally monster that let bad circumstances make him the bad guy, and then blames everybody but himself for his poor decisions. He's just like his creator. He's the exact same person as his creator.
I think he does blame himself as well. I think that one thing, because one of the last lines of the book is that it's something, I'm paraphrasing, that Victor could not hate me nearly as much as I hate myself.
Which is also a line I hear from these people all the time. I'm so tortured, and that justifies every bad thing I've done up until this point of redemption. And that's my reading on the monster. That's my hot take for the book.
I mostly agree with you, but I don't want to call him inherently bad, because when he was born innocent, and yes,
so's every incel on the internet. Every person's born innocent, but there comes a point where you have to take responsibility for your actions, and just like Victor, he doesn't.
Right, but I don't think that makes you wholly bad. I just think that makes you a person.
Yeah, I think it makes you a bad person. That's my hot take for the book.
I like to see the world in grays. Except for Grey Jedi.
I also hate Grey Jedi, so. But this isn't the Star Wars podcast.
What are Grey Jedi? Don't worry about it? Okay. Understood. All right.
I'll send you a 2-hour-long video essay.
He won't watch it.
He won't. It's like your knowledge is useless on me. General thoughts on the monster or the creature. This is going to be my hot take, I guess. The creature was kind of the only thing about the book that I felt was just kind of the biggest stretch. Like, it was supposed to be a man that was just so innocent and got all of its things from, like, it's supposed to be a child in an adult's body, but, like, it still was very comprehending of literature to the point where it could envelop, actual diction to be able to be used in a very holistic manner. And I just feel, I don't know, the creature to me was just a little bit, I know it's a creature.
Far-fetched.
Yeah. Like, does that make sense?
You have to have a certain amount of being willing to disbelieve.
Yeah, like suspension of disbelief.
So,
that's
what I was trying to say.
Yeah, but
I just pretended that the 8-foot monster had an 8-foot brain.
I agree with what you're saying, but the novel doesn't work unless...
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Like, I'm willing to forgive it, but it is one of the things that, like, the creature is probably... It makes it really hard to be sympathetic for me.
The thing that baffled me the most the first time I read it was the section where he's living in this hut adjacent to this house and watches these people for months upon months and learns to speak and read because of it. I could not fathom that the first time I read the book. The second time I read the book, I think that's actually my favorite part of the book, not because I sympathized with the monster, but just because it's so fucking strange that there's just so much to think about in that section.
I have a repeating nightmare where there's something living in my walls watching me, so it freaks me out every time.
I also think, throwing back to horror, I think that's the scariest part of the book.
And so every time I read this, I think of that nightmare, and it freaks me out.
My impressions on the creature, like the first time I read it, I was very much putting myself in Victor's shoes. I was like, it's a monster. I hate it. It's completely bad. It's so bad. This time, it's like we were discussing earlier. I don't think it's wholly good or wholly bad. I cannot... For me, like, if I put myself in the creature's place, I don't know. I cannot say with any certainty that I wouldn't have done the exact same thing. That doesn't justify... It's, one of our favorite phrases here. I'm not
excusing
I'm not excusing, I'm just explaining. Nothing, murdering the boy, blaming the girl, then murdering Elizabeth, and murdering his friend. None of that is okay. But to me, Mary Shelley writes the creature's story so well that I understand all of it. And I can't completely say that the monster is bad. It's very much one of those situations where my parents were abusive, so I'm abusive. That doesn't mean that being abusive is okay. The cycle has to end somewhere. But you also, you have to put some amount of the blame on the parents who are abusive, and their parents who are abusive, and their parents who are abusive, which is why I think my reading on it the second time is that Victor and the creature both share blame for the situation. Both of them are not wholly good or bad. Both of them are flawed humans.
My reading of the story is innocent people will always suffer for shitty people.
And that goes back to what I said
Yeah.
in themes. It's about narrow-minded men ruining other people's lives.
Yes.
So who is more human? Victor, his creation, or neither?
Like, I don't think there's anything more human than trying to avoid responsibility.
Which they both do.
Which they both do.
On a layer one kind of deal, I think the creature is more human because, again, layer one reading. Victor has the thing where I feel like they do kind of the same, but kind of the opposite in a sense. Like, I think Victor avoids placing blame, even if it's on himself. I think the monster insists on placing blame, especially when it's not himself. Like, does that make sense?
I feel like they blame each other. Like, the monster blames Victor for creating him.
It might be my interpretation of it. I don't think Victor takes enough blame.
No, definitely not.
I think the creature, and likewise, places too much blame.
Another hot take. I'm gonna say Victor is more human because he literally doesn't murder a child.
But to murder is human.
One kills the other.
We're inherently violent. We're an inherently violent species.
I guess
that's the way I read it. Was that like I don't know. I think, and again, I've only read this once.
I don't have an answer. I just wanted to see what you guys would say.
Oh, now I feel dumb.
Maybe Walton was the real monster.
Even if I had an answer, I don't think there is a right answer. I guess my answer would be that they're both very human. I don't find either of them to be more or less human than the other.
I'll kill you all! I'll drive you crazy, and I'll kill you all! I'm every nightmare you ever had. I am your worst dream come true. I'm everything you ever were afraid of.
Scary shit.
Scary shit.
Is the book scary?
The part where he's in the walls still scares me.
Yes.
But that's about it.
I think for me, where Victor is literally afraid to read his letters from home because he's going to find out that someone has died. Like, you pick up a letter, oh, it's from home, it's good news. Oh, my little brother has been murdered. Like, the idea that you're going to get a phone call or you're going to get a knock on the door and it's going to be a state trooper telling you that someone from your family is dead, like that terrifies me.
I think the scariest part of the book is, I'm trying to think of how to like explain it. So, do you have an answer? While I can think of how to word mine. Mine's kind of weird worded.
The scariest part to me is when the monsters just spies on people. So
yeah. No, I agree. I think that's the scariest.
That's very basic, but that is something I'm afraid of.
Yeah, it's terrible. And the fact that he does it for months and is not caught, even though he's purposely doing things that they notice.
Yeah, and he's not trying to be malevolent.
No.
But just the idea of being constantly watched terrifies me.
So as far as me, like with the actual horror factor, I think for me the horror of this book is much more metaphysical. One of the things I kept thinking as far as like what was scary is, I have a daughter, and this is, not unlike, a father, being with his child. And of course, in Victor's case, he basically just outright rejects it, which is not, of course, the case of what I would do. But for me, a very scary thought was, what if one day, through not really anybody's fault, maybe through a misunderstanding or just a general, maybe just a general bad day, having something that you created, something you helped bring into the world, hate you with such a passion that it feels the need that the only way that it can like cope with being around you and existing amongst you is just to cause you pain.
They're called teenagers.
I know, and that's a terrifying thought to me. But I mean, obviously, this is a much more grand impression of it. But I found that to be like the scariest idea in this book. It's like something you gave life to. Just with hate that hates you so much.
You just got to learn the phrase, I brought you into this world and I can take you out.
Bill Cosbyisms aside, like that's the scariest idea to me in this novel is, and granted, I mean, I like to think that, as a parent, I am not a piece of shit, but...
You're not quite a Victor Frankenstein.
No, but at the same time, I mean, I've heard of so many other cases where, like, a parent and a child just grow distant just because of a bad day. Like, just something as simple as, I don't know, like, just anything, really.
Or think about this, Jeffrey Dahmer had parents. Find out your kid's a serial killer.
Oh, yeah, like, just, like, your kid's a sociopath. Just
how do you cope with it? Like, yeah, even just something on a smaller scale.
Even if you do your best with it, it just doesn't work out.
There's this episode of Bluey where Dad didn't take Bluey and Bingo to the library when he said it would, and it almost ruined their relationship. Bluey and Bingo may have turned out to be killers.
Who the fuck is this a Blue's Clues thing?
Yeah.
Oh.
This almost sounds like Curious George.
It's an Australian cartoon.
Okay.
About dogs, and it's dad, mom, and then the two girls, Bluey and Bingo, and it's basically
when he first said it, I thought he said Blowy.
it's basically dad torture porn.
Okay.
And I can explain it because I've never related to a show so hard in my life.
Okay.
Dad takes the girls to the playground. The girls go play on the playground. Dad sits on the bench, pulls out his phone, starts playing on the phone. Another dad and their daughter come, and the other little girl starts playing. The other dad sits on a different bench as far away from the other dad as he can, pulls out his phone and starts playing on it. The three girls instantly become friends, and they decide, we're going to start a cafe. We're going to have a cafe. And they both yell, Dad, come over and be our customers at the cafe. And they make the two dads sit at this tiny little park bench table and force them to sit and have small talk while they pretend to be the customers at this cafe.
That sounds amazing.
It's the most horrific thing I've ever seen. Yeah.
We should do an episode on that.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those like kid shows that like adults love because of the little shit like that.
Okay, that sounds great.
They're like 5-minute episodes. I'll show you guys an episode at sometime.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Finishing up scary shit, let's throw to our horror expert. Daniel, what elements of the horror genre exist in this novel?
Okay, so not too explicit, but sort of implied with the language. You got some body horror in there, and that mostly comes with how Victor designed the creature to be beautiful, but it doesn't come out quite right. And there's a lot of interpretations about that. One of the things I read today said it was because he created like an uncanny valley effect, kind of like the Megan thing I keep bringing up. Like maybe it looks doll-like or it looks skeletal. The skin doesn't quite fit right, even though he like the bone structure is beautiful, but the skin's not fitting on it right. The book's not exactly clear on why it goes from supposedly beautiful to horrific.
Probably purposely vague, like you said.
Yeah. But it's also 8 feet tall. So you got some body horror. You also got just straight up monster horror because it's an 8-foot tall creature that's going around terrorizing people. God, the whole like science or what have we done horror. I don't know what you quite call that.
I guess playing God is the closest.
Yeah,
very Jurassic Park.
I know there's a phrase for it, but I cannot for the life of me think of it right now.
I don't know. Dog soldiers is a good
dog soldiers horror. There's even an element of like a siege horror, like Night of the Living Dead, because he keeps thinking, when's the monster gonna come?
Yeah, that's
and
true.
He keeps trying to be prepared.
Stalkers.
There's stalker horror. There's like even Hef brings up existential horror, because it's what are we doing morally here? There's a lot going on. Like it is impossible to narrow this thing down.
For the maid, there's like the almost like a true crime. Like I've been framed for this murder, and there's all this circumstantial evidence against me, and
I don't know what you would call it in a literary sense, but on TV tropes they call this adult fear, which is we brought it up during Stephen King's like getting the medical bill.
Yeah.
And Hef sort of brought it up as having a child that just hates you because of one bad day. That's an adult fear.
It's not something an 8-year-old would be afraid of.
It's not the monster in the closet. It's I can't pay my taxes and I'm going to lose the house.
Yeah.
But it's written in sort of a symbolic sort of way instead of a literal sort of way.
Metaphorical.
Thank you. This is what 4 Bud Lights do to me, apparently.
4 Bud Lights and 4 coffees.
Yeah, Pabst Blue Ribbon.
It's the grossest thing I've ever
This is not great.
I like the chocolate beer more.
I could see myself. I really like coffee.
Do you want to
just take a sip?
All right.
Take a sip. I really think it tastes like someone just poured a Bud Light into a beer.
Yeah, poured a Bud Light into a coffee.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Maybe you should hang out on my couch for a while after. He took 2 sips.
You need to take this away from me.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
I'll bring you more next time you're on one of these.
No, because right there is how I become just basically, that's how I become a vacuum. And then soon after that, a snowblower.
I mean, I almost bought us a 20-pack.
I like that a lot.
Kiss me, fat boy.
All right, let's move on. Kiss me, fat boy. Does Victor hate women? So let me say a couple things. He tries to birth a living thing without a woman. He tries to remove the female role of birth completely and make it something that a man can do solo. He is betrothed to what is described to us as an amazing woman from a time of birth, and all he does is try to spend time away from her. He goes to college and he stays for literal years, never goes back and see her. When it's time for him to marry her, he's like, and he leaves. Granted, we know it's because he's got to study up to make the bride, but he's constantly going away from her. And what ultimately happens is he knows that there's a threat to him or her, and on his wedding night, and he leaves her alone and she's killed. Does he subconsciously hate women and want Elizabeth to die?
Do you want my joke answer, like my real answer?
Both. Joke first. Let's have delivery.
Okay. My joke answer is Victor has discovered that men can be better at being women than women, or at least he believes so. So he tries to create a birthless society using the monster.
Gross.
His response is gross.
I mean, that would be gross. Like, if that's how human beings procreated from here on out, that would be gross.
I keep joking. Like, I bring this up every time, like, I see, like, advancements in sex dolls, how they're creating ones that can have, like, emotional responses to you. I'm like, as soon as they can bear children, I'm not going to need a woman anymore. But that's the joke.
Yeah.
In a real sense, I don't know if he so much as hates women as if he's just egocentric.
He's concerned about himself.
Yeah, it's not quite misogyny. At least it's not intentional misogyny.
I don't think he's in love with Elizabeth. I think he maybe he loves her, he cares about her in like a familial way. But the way that I've read this book is never that like has like a desperate romantic love towards her.
My favorite reading is him being in love with Henry.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was...
I don't really think that fits either.
I don't think that's intentional, but I'm like, I ship it.
You can definitely... There is like a homosexual reading, but...
And it's like I told you guys that about like the party where this was made, that there is a lot of belief, at least in like modern horror circles, that it was not a heteronormative party. So...
No, she and a lot of the people there had a very non-conformist upbringing.
Yeah.
So... I believe it.
So,
I could see a little envy for women, like out of Victor.
That's
because they can create life.
They can create, and this is as close as he can get.
Yeah.
Like men, I think, and there's two ways to look at it, like in terms of like actual creation. You know, men get into their projects, right? They get into their hobbies and various things like that, where they make and build stuff, right? That's the closest we will ever get to an actual creation of life.
I made a joke earlier today that Daniel and I have a child, and it's this podcast.
Well, I built it, like, this kind of shallow as this, but I mean, when I went to college and I built my PC, like, I built a PC, and the minute I hit that power button and it came on, like, kind of, like, it's the closest.
Like, it's your baby. You treat it like a baby.
Well, I mean, that's the closest to, like, I mean, I don't want to say birth of something, like, but I helped create that. I put it together and everything came together.
Building a Plex server from the ground up.
Envy makes sense because Victor goes, you make 8-pound baby, I make 8-foot baby.
Daniel, how do you feel about your book that you wrote from 0 pages to whatever, 500 pages.
Oh, I hate everything that I write, which people insist means it's okay.
No, I don't think that means that it's okay. I think it just means that you don't have any confidence.
Yeah.
I'm a man filled with incredible self-loathing.
I think the ego part comes like a fraction after he created it. I don't necessarily catch an egotistical vibe from Victor. I could see a little bit of envy.
So maybe not so much ego, and that he's like, oh, I'm so great, I'm so awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Ego, just that he's only concerned about his goal.
He is very much like, I would say, narrow-minded as far as his own needs. Like, yeah. I'm like you, I didn't catch much of a vibe. Like, I feel like he's hyper-focused. He married Elizabeth really more out of an expectation rather than an actual affiliation.
Yeah, I said, I think he cares about her.
Oh, yeah, I do. But I don't think that was, like, his... Like, that's not the high point of his life.
He's sitting there going, I could have built a footwife. Instead, I get this.
The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you!
The power of Christ compels you. Victor's religion, or lack of religion, is not explicitly stated. It does imply in the beginning that he's not brought up with religion, that his parents are not super religious. But after reading this book, do you see him as a man who believed in God? Do you see him as an atheist, as an agnostic? What's your just thoughts on what his feelings on faith would be?
My personal feelings on what his faith, like how he would like view the world and stuff. I think he's so egocentric that he doesn't even think about it. He's so hyper focused on the things that he can personally do that he doesn't give any credence to whether God or not exists because it doesn't matter anymore.
I think it goes back to that expectant thing, kind of like with Elizabeth. Like, he's expected to marry Elizabeth. I think he's expected to have a belief in God at that time. I don't necessarily think he does, but also doesn't. I could see him being more agnostic.
Yeah, that's probably a good word.
I kind of read him. This is just an interpretation. We're never going to know this kind of shit. I kind of read him as being a deist, which is a person who believes that God created a universe and then just step back and has no influence on what happened after creation.
I shall have more influence over my creation.
Until it talks to me, then I want nothing to do with it.
And then he sees it and it's like, oh, that's why God stepped away.
God has an Instagram account, but he's not an influencer.
There's a... Oh, fuck, I'm trying to remember the name of this fucking religion.
Christianity.
It is a very early subsect of Christianity, but they believe in, like, multiple layers of God, and there's, like, this creature called the Demiurge, which is, like, what most people would think of as Yahweh, that the true God created, but because it's, like, a reflection of God, when it tries to create things, everything's fucked up, and each layer down is more fucked up.
I don't know anything about that.
Sounds interesting.
God dang, I should know this.
That actually sounds kind of cool.
All right, well, you find a Wikipedia thing and a YouTube video, and we'll do a bonus episode on that.
I will.
All right.
Oh my God! Are you Stephen King? No, I'm Dean Koontz. Oh.
All right, so in the meantime, let's jump to Kings and Koontz. We have got to start wrapping this up. So, Hef, what is your king for the novel Frankenstein?
I have it written down. Give me a second. All right. My king is that despite the fact that this is a world-renowned, universally acclaimed book, I think it's still a hidden gem.
Yeah, kinda.
I think so few people actually know what this book's about.
You know, what's funny is that's my Koontz.
Interesting. I don't know. I like stuff like that.
I do too, which is why I think it's a bad thing that
nobody people know about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, different arcs. All right. Yeah.
Daniel, your king.
My king, and I bring this up every time I talk about the book, and I've already brought it up tonight. Is when Frankenstein, when the monster comes up to Frankenstein, and is like, I killed your brother, I murdered this woman, and I'm gonna keep doing it until you get me laid. I think that is so fucking funny. And no one ever talks about it.
No.
It's not in it's not in any of the adaptations. It's great.
So both my king and my Koontz are meta, so not within the actual book itself, but my king is is Mary Shelley. So it's my queen in my Koontz. It's just her and her story, and the fact that she was fucking 18 when she wrote what is one of, and arguably could be one of the best novel of all time. Like, just so amazing. And then, since I've already said my Koontz is that people don't know about it. I wish that this book was propped up more than it is. In your Koontz, Mr. Head.
Oh, sorry. This is my biggest critique about the monster. I was going to bring it up earlier, but since it was Koontz technically, the one thing that really irked me was the scene where the monster puts the picture in that girl's pocket. That irked me for some reason.
Okay.
Like, yeah. I think it's just like...
Where he frames her.
Yeah, of all the... Because there's just outright murder that he does. That's, like, the only thing that, like, he does to, like, punish Victor that, like, just...
It's kind of contrived.
Yeah, like... Because, I mean, maybe I missed the reading of this.
He had to sneak into a barn and not wake her up.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so... Like, I was kind of... when I was reading... I was expecting that to just be kind of something that she had.
Yeah.
Like, it was just like, oh, it was there, and she just happened to have it, rather than it being, like, insinuating in her case.
That ties into my Koontz.
And I didn't... I just found that to be, like, kind of a far-fetched thing for him to be just like, I have slipped... I'm an 8-foot-tall fucking giant thing, and I have snuck into this thing and slipped this in her pocket.
2 quick thoughts.
Sure.
I think a simpler way to write that would have been that she found it while she was looking for the kid.
Mm. Yeah.
And then oh no, I found that. Of course you would say that you found it. What I find contrived about that is that this creature is learning all of these new concepts, and he's already learned the concept of framing someone for a crime.
like that's like intent.
Yeah.
That's way more than what he does up to that point.
So yeah, I agree with it. I don't think it bothered me as much as it bothered you, but it's I definitely found it super contrived, and it's definitely not the best part of this book for sure.
Okay. That ties into my Koontz, and this isn't so much a problem with this book as it is with writing at the time. There are a series of contrivances. The monster just so happened to take this sheet that had its entire creation in a journal inside its pocket, and he just so happened to find Paradise Lost so he can relate to Satan, which ties into the thematic purposes, and he just so happens to be able to find this woman who is a very good friend and servant to. But that is, again, if you read these older novels, a lot of them are written like this.
Continuity and plot consistency weren't things that people cared about. The best book of the most popular book at the time was the Bible, so that just
but, which is also a series of contrivances.
That's one of my favorite jokes from Shanghai Nights too.
But
Roy O'Bannon versus
you had to ask me, like,
it was second to the Bible.
If you had to ask me to criticize the book in any way, I'd go, okay, there is a series of contrivances which the entire plot relies upon.
Right.
But that's like the most tepid criticism I can offer.
Okay, it's time to rank, which I've already done, so I didn't have to and ah about it, but I'm going to bring them up for you guys to look at if I can figure out what the fuck I'm doing. Here we go.
I believe in you.
Scroll down real quick so you don't see mine. Okay. Well, you know it's not my bottom 3, but you probably could have guessed that.
It's my number 3.
It's your number 3.
Yep. I wanted to make it my number 1, but I love The Mist so much personally, and it, I think, is the best modern horror novel. Or at least, like, modern from our generation.
It's my number 2. Same, but I like it a little bit more than The Mist.
Yeah.
And part of that is because The Mist is so short. I think that's a good part about The Mist because it's tight and there's not really any, like...
I can see me on a different day ranking it above The Mist, but, like, if you're asking me my gut reaction looking at my list, that's...
And I'm going to get so much more out of rereads from Frankenstein than out of The Mist.
Yeah.
But I could also see, like, if I reread The Mist tomorrow, I might flip-flop them.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's honestly, if you're talking, like, quality of book, it's probably number 1, but there's no way I enjoy it more than it.
There's no way I enjoy it more than it, and I also think there's an argument for it, but that would be like a 2-hour podcast on its own.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. All right, Mr. F.
It's number 1.
Number 1.
Because he hasn't finished it yet.
Par 4. I'm working on it. I loved Firestarter, but it's just, let's be frank.
Yeah,
Firestarter is great.
Firestarter is great, but I read this and I'm like,
wow,
no.
That's a book.
Wow. John Rainbird.
All right, homework. If you could reanimate dead flesh, who or what would you give life to?
A worm.
What?
A worm.
A worm?
Yes.
Just a worm?
Just a worm? Yeah, because I could do it on a small scale and it couldn't come back to get me and put a picture in my pocket.
No. That's fair, I guess.
I was the guy who chose not to open the book of Cthulhu, so
yeah.
just letting you all, refreshing you on that.
Okay, that's fair.
Hitler, because I think I'd get my own Hellsing series out of it. Nazi zombies.
Michael Jackson with real zombie parts, so he could do a remake of the Thriller music video as a zombie.
I would only say Hitler just so that I could remake that scene from Inglourious Bastards.
Yeah.
That's a good movie.
I want him to talk Kanye down.
Okay, question for the listeners. Have you read Frankenstein? If you haven't, are you going to read it now? Are you interested? Or was this a big turnoff? You're going to hear our socials here in a few minutes. Let us know what you think. For further reading, I really love Mary Shelley's short story, The Mortal Immortal. Also, some of the other stories that came about of those fireside chats she had with her friends, The Last Vampire, Into My Journey. And of course, if you like gothic horror literature, you have to read Dracula. Also really recommend Carmilla, which we've done an episode on. Definitely check it out. One of my favorite episodes. Super fun. Any other recommendations for if you enjoyed Frankenstein?
My mother's favorite book, Jane Eyre, because it is written in the same sort of romantic language. In fact, anything from the Bronte sisters.
Yeah, I guess Jane Austen.
Jane Austen, if you're interested in the
language,
the prose.
Yeah.
That's the direction I would point you to.
Mm-hmm. I also have an uncommon recommendation. The works of one author named Tracy Chevalier. You probably never heard of her. She wrote, if you were in high school and you took honors English, you probably read one of her books. It was called The Girl with a Pearl Earring.
I took remedial English.
Took AP.
If you took AP, you definitely didn't read this book.
I did not.
It's a book about a girl in the late 1800s. It's during kind of the Renaissance of France. It's about a girl who basically takes a job as a maid to a painter, and while she's being a maid over at his residence, it inevitably ends up that he ends up using her as a work. But the girl's she's 15, 16 years old or whatever like that, and it's entirely told from her perspective, so you're kind of getting this idea that she's kind of falling in love with this man who's been painting her, while there's all this other stuff going on in the background, and it's kind of a picturesque. It's a picturesque of the time of which it was written. Now, the reason I recommend this isn't necessarily because of it's common with Frankenstein, but it is very much that kind of romantic age. The short version is Tracy Chevalier is one of the more modern old storytellers.
Okay.
Upcoming on the Horror of Babylon, next week on Sunday, we are going to be starting the first of 3 episodes reviewing adaptations of Frankenstein. So this coming Sunday, we are going to review Thomas Edison's 1910 Frankenstein and the Boris Karloff 1931 Frankenstein. The next week, which will release on January 1st, so our first episode of the new year, is a book episode, so we will be reviewing Junji Ito's Frankenstein. And then our last adaptation episode will release on January 8th, we are going to double up. We're going to review Mary Shelley's Frankenstein from 1994 with Robert De Niro and Victor Frankenstein from 2015 with Daniel Radcliffe and James McAvoy.
I am most excited for Ryan's take on the Junji Ito episode.
I'm most excited to watch Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which actually looks like an adaptation of the book.
It does. It looks like an adaptation of the book in the same way that Bram Stoker's Dracula looks like an adaptation of the book.
Speaking of Dracula, our next novel episode will drop on January 15th, and we will be reading Dracula by Bram Stoker.
Spoiler alert, I'm going to suck that book's dick for like 2 hours.
Me too. Me too. And I'm going to go ahead.
I'll be here too.
I'm gonna tell you what, Frankenstein is not going to be my number 2 for very long.
Yeah.
Unless I have a drastically different reading of it this time, but we'll see. All right. Thank you both for reading Frankenstein and recording with me tonight.
It was great.
Oh yeah, I got way more out of this than I had all expected. So.
Well, we have a patron now, so I had to try harder.
And yes, thank you again to Abigail the First.
Mother of dragons, breaker of chains, freer of slaves.
The rail splitter.
Penny slots, penny slots, penny slots.
Abigail Lincoln.
Bringer of $5.
If you want to become our second patron, you will also get a title. And you know what? From now on, all patrons will get a title.
Yeah, I will keep going on and making some ridiculous shit up, mostly based off of Game of Thrones.
And you will get a shout out in each and every episode as long as you keep that subscription up. And once again, I just want to put out there, anybody who's interested in being a patron but doesn't want to do it every month, that's cool. You can do it for a month and cancel, do it for 3 months and cancel. Anything you're willing to contribute to the running of the show is greatly appreciated. We don't expect anything from anybody.
I'm still honestly shocked that Ryan said, "Hey Daniel, I have something to tell you," and then he wouldn't tell me, and then I come over here and he tells me that, and I'm like, "What? There's no way."
Yeah, exactly. So again, and if Abigail the First, we greatly appreciate it.
And if you're sober, would they really appreciate it?
I'm sober tonight. I've had 1 sip of beer.
I'm sober-ish. There's not very much alcohol in this.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want one.
I might actually
don't give me that.
I might still be drunk from the last 2 days.
Yes, your office frat party.
Next time you come over, I will bring us more of this.
God damn you, I love you. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'll bring Ryan something he likes.
Never mind. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Stay tuned for our socials and stay scary.
Stay scary.
Stay scary, folks.
And now for the obligatory socials. Please like, share, and subscribe. Follow Daniel at @DStarSick on Twitter. Follow Ryan at Darth Damio on the Bluebird app. You can find the podcast on Twitter at HorrorPod69. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Slasher, and Goodreads. Become part of the Disturbed community by asking for the Facebook group and Discord links. Send dick pics to the Horror of Babylon podcast at gmail.com. Support the show at patreon.com/the Horror of Babylon. In closing, you can let your friends know that The Horror of Babylon is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, and all other major podcast apps. Stay scary.